The truth doesn't knock politely. Sometimes it kicks the door off the hinges, walks right into the living room of your life, and demands that you finally stop lying to yourself about who is truly standing in your corner. Most people do not actually hate intelligence, resilience, or divine grace. What they absolutely hate is what your intelligence, your resilience, and your authentic grace make them feel about their own profound stagnation. They do not hate your light. They hate that your blinding light illuminates the dusty, neglected, rotting corners of their own soul where they gave up on their dreams. Welcome back, chosen ones. I know the season you are navigating right now feels incredibly heavy, deeply confusing, and intensely isolating. You are looking around at people you once trusted, people you once broke bread with, and you are watching their masks slip, slide, and shatter entirely. You are watching them completely unravel. You are currently dealing with insecure, toxic, highly performative individuals who are simultaneously trying to mimic your every move, while secretly praying for your total downfall. They are exposing themselves, trying desperately to compete with you, and secretly melting down over the fact that you simply refused to break. The overarching theme of this exact season is survival, and the uncomfortable raw reality is that some people around you placed a secret expiration date on your resilience. They looked at the intense trials you were facing, the heavy spiritual warfare you were enduring, the absolute magnitude of the attacks coming against your life, and they quietly placed their bets against you. They thought the immense pressure would crush you. They thought the cold isolation would break your mind. Quite frankly, they are freaking out because you were supposed to be completely gone before Christmas. You were supposed to have folded by the end of the year, surrendered your divine calling, and come crawling back to the very toxic dynamics you fought so hard to escape. But you did not. You survived, and your unbothered survival is tearing their carefully constructed, performative reality to shreds. Let's break down exactly why this is happening. Let's dive deep into the raw, uncomfortable, and unspoken mechanics of human psychology and spiritual warfare. Let's break down exactly why they are currently losing their minds. Let's begin. Before we dive into the core of this message, I need you to subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, drop a comment with what point hit you hardest, and share the video with someone who needs the reminder. Number 1. They never expected you to survive long enough to see their true faces. You are operating from a place of profound, hard-earned internal alignment, while they are operating from a borrowed, insecure, and highly performative facade. They rely entirely on external validation to tell them who they are, whereas you have been forced into the grueling crucible of isolation to discover exactly who the Creator says you are. To fundamentally understand why your survival is triggering such a monumental psychological meltdown, we have to deeply analyze the psychology of the insecure observer. When a person lacks internal substance, they cannot generate their own sense of power, identity, or peace. Instead, they must siphon it from their environment. They absolutely need to see others failing, struggling, or shrinking in order to feel tall. When they saw you enter your darkest season, their ego felt intensely safe. They assumed your downfall was imminent. They ran the calculations based on their own emotional fragility, assuming that because they would instantly break under that kind of immense pressure, you would naturally break too. But you endured, and this endurance is precisely what they cannot stomach. It is exactly like watching someone frantically stack, playing cards on a windy table. hoping that the spectacle of your collapse will distract the room from the fact that they have built their entire life on a foundation of sand. Meanwhile, you have been quietly, methodically stacking heavy bricks on solid ground. Because you outlasted their timeline, the wind has radically shifted, and now their flimsy architecture is blowing away in the storm. From the outside, their behavior looks incredibly tragic and deeply goofy. They are frantically scrambling to maintain a false narrative of superiority while staring at a person who has fundamentally outgrown them in every conceivable way. They see the calm, but they do not see the resilience. They see the quiet confidence, but they do not see the thousands of hours you spent wrestling with your own demons in the dark to secure it. They are freaking out because your continued existence proves that their predictions were entirely wrong. And if their predictions were wrong, it means they absolutely do not possess the control they so desperately thought they had over your destiny. You were supposed to be a tragic cautionary tale by the end of the year, but instead, you became a living, breathing testament of divine endurance. They are utterly terrified of the strength you possess because it highlights the exact strength they lack, and they have absolutely no idea how to handle a spirit that refuses to expire on their schedule. Their entire performance hinged on your absence, and your continued radiant presence is driving them to the absolute brink of insanity. Number 2, you force people to confront the spiritual altitude they absolutely refused to climb. There is a stark, undeniable contrast between a chosen one who has paid the heavy, agonizing price for their spiritual elevation, and an individual who simply wants the aesthetic of wisdom without the crucifixion of the ego. You possess an authentic, gritty, battle-tested alignment. You have the scars to prove your growth. They possess a rehearsed script made up of shallow cliches and performative spirituality. They want the glory without the guts. The deep psychology here is rooted in the terrifying, paralyzing fear of stagnation. When they look at you, they do not just see a person. They see a walking, breathing reflection of their own untapped potential and their own paralyzing cowardice. They see the towering mountain they were called to climb, but deemed too steep, too lonely, and too dangerous. Because they chose the valley of comfort, your presence at the summit gives them severe spiritual vertigo. They act like someone wearing gaudy fake jewelry they cannot afford, strutting around a crowded room trying to impress strangers, while you walk around wealthy in rags, possessing an internal treasure that no thief can ever touch. They resent you deeply because they cannot buy, fake, or manipulate their way into the frequency you naturally inhabit. This is exactly why their attempts to bring you down feel so frantic, unhinged, and desperately performative. They are trying to pull you back down to the valley because the pure altitude of your authenticity makes it incredibly difficult for them to breathe in their own illusions. They will try to mock your journey, question your motives, and belittle your massive growth. But it is entirely a cowardly defense mechanism. They are desperately trying to convince themselves that the mountain isn't worth climbing, because admitting that it is would require them to acknowledge that they have wasted years of their life settling for a lukewarm, mediocre existence. They see the elevation, but they do not understand the isolation. They see the crown, but they are utterly blind to the heavy cross you had to bear to wear it. The goofy nature of their jealousy is exposed every single time they try to compete with your natural glow using artificial lights. You force them to realize that true ascension is an inside job, and because their inside is entirely empty, they are left screaming from the bottom of the mountain, furious that you refuse to stay down there with them. Number 3, their script for your life required your absolute submission, but you took the pen and wrote yourself as the victor. You exist in a state of unbothered autonomy, navigating life through divine instruction and raw intuition, while they exist within a rigid, performative hierarchy where everyone must play their assigned role to keep the fragile illusion intact. In their carefully curated mental theater, you were explicitly cast as the supporting character, the scapegoat, the one who takes the blame, or the quiet one who absorbs their dysfunction without a single complaint. The psychological core of this toxic dynamic is the fragile ego's as absolute terror of unpredictability. Toxic, insecure individuals view relationships not as genuine connections, but as strict contracts of compliance. As long as you followed their script, you were considered a good person. But the moment you healed, the moment you recognized your infinite worth and stepped completely out of the role of the victim or the enabler, you triggered a catastrophic collapse of their internal narrative. It is exactly like a desperate, sweating director screaming at an empty stage, trying to conduct a play where the lead actor has already walked out the back door to write and direct a vastly superior movie. They look completely unhinged because they are running around with a script that no longer has a cast. They try to hand the script to other people, frantically attempting to recruit flying monkeys and new enablers to play your old part. But nobody fits the costume the way you did. The elaborate mechanics of this reaction are fascinating and deeply sad to witness from the outside. They cannot simply say they are hurt that you left, or that they feel utterly powerless without your compliance. Instead, their ego forces them to project and pathologize your sweeping growth. They loudly declare that you are crazy, you have changed, you are incredibly arrogant. They must demonize your healing because acknowledging your health would force them to admit their profound sickness. You completely ruined their play. You dismantled their theater brick by brick, and they are throwing a massive, embarrassing tantrum in the empty seats because they do not know how to exist without a compliant audience or a willing victim. They are frantic because the pen is securely in your hand, and they can no longer dictate the ending of your story. Number 4, your absolute silence is deafening, and it is driving their chaotic, attention-seeking nervous systems completely frantic. There is a profound, undeniable contrast between your grounded stillness and their loud, chaotic, attention-seeking hype. You are securely anchored in the quiet truth of your identity, entirely self-sourced and divinely sustained, while they are constantly broadcasting a hyper-curated, noisy version of their lives just to prove to the world that they exist. The deep psychological truth here is that insecure, highly competitive individuals feed entirely on reaction. To them, your reaction is their currency. If you are angry, they hold absolute power over your emotional state. If you are defending yourself, they hold power over your mental focus. If you are arguing with them, they hold power over your energetic frequency. But when you offer them absolute, unyielding silence, you essentially starve their ego to death. The narcissist, the toxic competitor, the performative hater, they all share one fundamental paralyzing fear, the fear of being completely irrelevant. Your silence communicates the ultimate narcissistic injury. It tells them that they do not even register on your radar anymore. It is like they are standing at the edge of a bottomless well, throwing massive stones into the pitch black and hearing absolutely no splash. They throw a rumor down the well. Silence. They throw a passive-aggressive social media post down the well. Silence. They throw a blatant provocation down the well. Silence. The utter lack of an echo drives them to the absolute brink of insanity, because it forces them to sit alone with the very toxicity they were trying to project onto you. You will watch them continuously escalate, becoming louder, sloppier, and significantly more ridiculous, performing for an audience of one who outright refuses to buy a ticket. They see the quiet, but they do not understand the absolute, grueling restraint it takes to maintain it. They see the non-reaction, but they do not comprehend the monumental internal boundary you have erected to protect your peace. You are not ignoring them out of petty spite. You are ignoring them because engaging with a demon on their own territory is a quick way to catch hell. Your peace is protected by an impenetrable wall of silence, and they are bloodying their own hands trying to punch through it. It looks goofy, it looks pathetic, and it completely exposes their desperate need for your attention. Number 5. They weaponized your isolation as a punishment, entirely failing to realize that isolation was your divine incubator. Toxic people rely heavily on the herd. They absolutely need the crowd, the cliques, the group chats, and the consensus of the majority to validate their mediocre existence. You, on the other hand, have learned to find the voice of the Creator in the absolute stillness of the desert. When they decided to ice you out, to ostracize you, or to abandon you during your hardest season, they truly thought they were delivering a devastating death blow. The psychology behind the silent treatment, group exclusion, and social banishment is deeply rooted in primitive human fears. In ancient times, to be exiled from the tribe meant certain physical death. Today, insecure people use social exile to cause psychological death. They project their own deepest terror, the terror of being completely alone with their own thoughts, onto you. They assumed that without their constant validation, you would wither away, lose your mind, and eventually beg for readmission into their toxic circle. It is exactly like they maliciously tried to starve a magnificent seed by burying it deep in the suffocating dirt and walking away, laughing at their perceived victory. They thought the dirt was a dark grave, but they had absolutely no idea it was a fertile garden. While they were busy performing in the shallow light of their fake friendships, you were in the dark, establishing a root system so deep, so vast, and so incredibly strong that no earthly drought could ever kill you again. You used the heavy isolation to recalibrate your nervous system, to purge their toxic programming from your mind, and to commune directly with the divine. Now you are emerging from the dirt, entirely unrecognizable to them. You are blooming, producing massive fruit, and standing taller than they ever thought possible. They are looking at you with a bizarre mixture of awe and absolute horror. The very weapon they used to try and destroy you is exactly what built the titanium architecture of your current strength. They meant it for evil, but the universe used it to forge a masterpiece, and their fragile minds cannot handle the reality of that incredible transmutation. They wanted you gone before Christmas, but instead they just gave you the perfect environment to grow invincible. Number 6. You entirely stopped absorbing their toxic projections, leaving them to drown in their own unfiltered psychological waste. In the past, you were likely an empathic sponge. Your contrast now is striking and undeniable. You have completely transformed from a porous container that absorbed the guilt, shame, and anxiety of others into a solid Teflon wall where absolutely nothing toxic can stick. They, however, have remained the exact same, walking factories of venom desperately needing somewhere to dump their psychological waste so they do not have to process it themselves. The psychology of projection is one of the most insidious, cowardly defense mechanisms of the human ego. When a highly performative person is harboring immense self-hatred, jealousy, or corruption, the psychic weight of carrying that dark truth is too much for their fragile mind to bear. So, they subconsciously assign their own ugly traits to you. If they are heavily manipulative, they will loudly accuse you of manipulation. If they are deeply insecure, they will call you arrogant. If they are lying, they will claim you are deceptive. For years, you probably took the bait, internalizing their wild accusations and trying to fix yourself to make them comfortable. But then you woke up. You realized that you were carrying heavy luggage that did not belong to you. When you firmly set the boundary and refused to hold their garbage anymore, it triggered a massive psychological crisis for them. It is exactly like a poisoner who prepared a laced glass of wine for their enemy, only to have the glass pushed back across the table, forcing them to drink their own concoction. They are currently choking on their own malice. They are absolutely frantic because the emotional dumping ground they relied on for years has been permanently closed. Without you to absorb their darkness, the darkness is consuming them from the inside out. They look incredibly goofy, complaining to anyone who will listen about how cold or distant you have become, when in reality, you are simply refusing to be their emotional hazmat suit. They see the firm boundary, but they do not see the absolute freedom you feel behind it. They see the cold detachment, but they do not understand the profound self-love it requires to let someone else drown in the horrible storm they created themselves. You handed their demons back to them, and they are entirely unequipped to fight their own battles. Number 7. They fatally mistook your profound kindness for weakness, and in doing so, they awakened the immovable warrior within you. You operate from a place of profound, internal, gentle strength. A strength that is so deeply secure, it does not need to announce itself or intimidate others to feel valid. They operate from a place of performative dominance, relying entirely on aggression, bullying, subtle jabs, and intimidation to mask their internal cowardice. The psychological makeup of a bully, a toxic competitor, or a fake friend is profoundly pathetic. They constantly scan their environment for people who are empathetic, forgiving, and patient, and they horribly misinterpret those divine qualities as an open invitation for exploitation. They thought that because you were quiet, you were blind. They thought that because you easily forgave them in the past, you were stupid. They thought that because you purposefully avoided unnecessary conflict, you were entirely incapable of fighting. Their massively inflated ego told them that they were the apex predator and you were the helpless prey. But they made a catastrophic, life-altering error. It is like a foolish trespasser walking into a dark cave and aggressively kicking what they thought was a dead rug, only to hear the deep, rumbling, bone-shaking growl of a sleeping lion that has just opened its eyes. You did not even have to actively attack them. You simply stood up to your full height, and the sheer magnitude of your spiritual presence sent them scrambling backward in absolute terror. The elaboration here is incredibly crucial. When a chosen one finally draws a hard line in the sand, it is not an act of petty aggression. It is an act of divine authority. The sudden shift from a gentle peacemaker to an immovable force of nature completely shatters the toxic person's paradigm. They are freaking out right now because they realize they have been playing silly games with someone who could destroy them with a single word, but chooses not to out of grace. They are terrified of the monster they thought you were. But they are even more terrified of the absolute, chilling discipline you show in keeping your sword sheathed while they swing wildly at the air. Their panic is completely visible, exposing the fact that they never actually had any real power. They only had the power you politely allowed them to borrow. Number 8. Your undeniable organic success exposes the terrifying lie that their worldly manipulative formula is the only way to win. You are walking a path of pure divine alignment, gracefully moving with the rhythmic flow of universal timing and authentic purpose. They are stuck on an exhausting treadmill of the worldly matrix, blindly following a rigid, soulless formula of manipulation, networking, brown-nosing, and compromising their integrity just to get a seat at a table that doesn't even serve real food. The psychology of their current meltdown here is deeply rooted in agonizing cognitive dissonance. They have sacrificed their authenticity, their peace, and their morals to achieve a certain level of status or control. They believed, with every fiber of their being, that this was the absolute necessary price of admission. But then they look at you. They watch you completely bypass their entire corrupt system. They watch you refuse to play the political games, refuse to engage in the toxic gossip, refuse to compromise your soul, and yet you are still rising. You are still being incredibly blessed. You are still opening massive doors that they couldn't even find the keys for. It is exactly like they have spent their entire life navigating a treacherous ocean, using a broken compass and a torn map, suffering through horrible storms they created themselves, while they watch you effortlessly glide across the water simply by following the stars. Your existence proves that their immense suffering and their moral compromises were completely unnecessary. This realization creates immense, burning hostility. They cannot be happy for you, because your victory totally invalidates their entire methodology. To accept your success as legitimate would mean they have to accept that they sold their soul for absolutely nothing. So, they try to dismiss your success as dumb luck, or they try to find a hidden flaw in your character to explain away your massive blessings. They are completely exhausting themselves, trying to decode a high-vibrational spiritual algorithm using a broken worldly calculator, and it is entirely breaking their minds. They see the heavy blessing, but they do not see the fierce obedience. They see the massive harvest, but they do not comprehend the absolute purity of the seed you planted. Their entire worldview is collapsing because you proved that you can win the game without ever selling your soul. Number 9. They are completely exhausted from the heavy toll of maintaining their mask, while you are energized by the sheer lightness of the truth. You are currently living a raw, unfiltered, and deeply authentic existence. You have absolutely nothing to hide, no false narratives to manage, and no fake personas to uphold. They, conversely, are trapped in a dark labyrinth of their own making, frantically juggling different versions of themselves for different people, absolutely terrified that one minor slip-up will bring the whole house of cards crashing down. The psychological reality of living a highly performative life is that it requires a massive, continuous, and heavily draining expenditure of psychic energy. Lying, pretending, and constantly competing are not natural states of human being. They are highly demanding cognitive tasks. The hater, the imitator, the insecure rival, they are all experiencing profound, systemic, internal burnout. When they observe your life, they are violently struck by the effortless nature of your energy. You do not have to remember what specific lie you told to whom. You do not have to perform for the crowd. It is exactly like they are stubbornly holding their breath underwater, weighing themselves down with heavy stones of deceit, jealousy, and massive insecurity, while they watch you breathing freely, walking effortlessly along the sunlit shore. They are drowning in their own obsessive image management. The tragic comedy of this entire dynamic is that they are doing it completely to themselves. Nobody asked them to be fake. Nobody asked them to compete with you. They entered themselves into a race you didn't even know was happening, and they are collapsing from exhaustion on the track while you are just enjoying a leisurely walk. They see your vibrant energy, and it makes their chronic fatigue feel even heavier. They desperately want to drag you into the water with them, because if you are drowning too, they won't feel so incredibly bad about their absolute inability to breathe. But you refuse to sink. You remain firmly in the light, and the stark contrast between your vitality and their spiritual exhaustion is becoming completely impossible for them to ignore or conceal. They are tired. They are so incredibly, deeply, profoundly tired of pretending they are better than you. Number 10. You have become a haunting, walking mirror, reflecting the very potential they abandoned for the sake of societal comfort. You actively represent the courageous pursuit of growth, the fierce willingness to step into the terrifying unknown, and the absolute refusal to settle for a lukewarm, predictable existence. They actively represent the tragedy of the comfort zone, the act of settling for much less, and the slow, agonizing death of a dream deferred. The psychology here taps directly into one of the most painful, haunting human emotions, the deep resentment of the unlived life. Every single human being has a calling, a spark of divine potential, but many people look at the heavy cost of that calling, the pain of healing, the risk of total failure, the required relentless discipline, and they cowardly retreat in fear. They build a comfortable, highly defended life in the deep valley of mediocrity. For a while, they can smoothly convince themselves they are perfectly happy. But then, you show up. You are the living embodiment of the courageous choice they did not make. You are the massive risk they did not take. You are the deep healing they actively avoided. Looking at you is exactly like a ghost haunting a beautiful mansion they were offered, but were too cowardly to buy. Every time they see you succeed, every time they hear your authentic voice, it is a painful, stabbing reminder of what they could have been if they only had a fraction of your courage. They do not necessarily want to destroy you. They desperately want to destroy the mirror. They want to wildly diminish your achievements so they can desperately soothe the aching regret in their own chest. They will say pathetic things to their flying monkeys as a sad way to anesthetize their own sense of failure. They are frantic because the longer you thrive, the harder it becomes to ignore the quiet, desperate weeping of their own abandoned soul. They see the raw courage, but they do not want to see the choice. They see the beautiful outcome, but they absolutely refuse to acknowledge that the only thing separating your reality from theirs is the sheer audacity to believe that you are worth the fight. Your light reminds them of the fire they willingly put out. Number 11. Their elaborate smear campaigns have completely failed because your energetic frequency utterly outshines their cheap fiction. You firmly stand grounded in undeniable truth and heavy integrity, operating on a frequency of pure resonance. They are miserably operating in the gutter of gossip, emotional manipulation, whispered half-truths, and desperate narrative control. The deep psychology behind a smear campaign is the ultimate act of profound powerlessness. When toxic people finally realize they can no longer control you, they pivot entirely to trying to control how other people see you. They recognize that their direct access to your energy has been permanently severed, so they try to wage a cowardly proxy war using the easily manipulated opinions of the public, the friend group, or the family. They meticulously craft a fake story where you are the villain, the crazy one, the traitor, or the complete failure. But here is exactly where their strategy completely unravels. Undeniable truth does not need a PR team. Truth has a vibration, a weight, and a self-evident geometry that cheap fiction can never replicate. Their frantic attempt to destroy your reputation is like a group of angry, messy toddlers trying to spray paint the massive sun black. They might make a huge mess on their own hands. They might temporarily obscure the view for the incredibly foolish people standing right next to them. But the sheer radiating power of the sun will eventually burn right through the paint, blind the toddlers, and brilliantly illuminate the entire sky. People who are actually paying attention, the ones who truly matter, can feel the heavy desperation in their gossip. They can hear the frantic, obsessive tone in their voice every single time they talk about you. Meanwhile, you are over here, completely silent, living incredibly well, and glowing with unbothered peace. The stark contrast is absolutely jarring to the outside observer. The smear campaign always spectacularly backfires, because the more they talk about you, the more they reveal their absolute undeniable obsession with you. They are freaking out because they threw everything they possessed at your name, and your character simply absorbed the blow and shined even brighter. Your heavy integrity vastly outlasted their dark imagination, leaving them holding the bag of lies. Number 12. They finally realize that you fundamentally do not need them anymore, and their perceived power vanished into thin air. You have successfully reached a state of supreme, self-sourced sovereignty, recognizing that the Creator is your only true provider, defender, and sustainer. They, however, are deeply, pathologically codependent, heavily relying on a false sense of superiority and the grand illusion of being completely necessary to feel secure in their own skin. The deep psychological terror they are experiencing right now is the sheer horror of absolute obsolescence. Toxic individuals, narcissistic personalities, and competitive haters always try to position themselves as the ultimate gatekeepers of your success, your happiness, or your social standing. They desperately want you to believe that without their approval, their resources, or their network, you will perish in the cold. For a very long time, they immensely enjoyed the power trip of thinking you were entirely dependent on them. But then the massive, undeniable shift happened. You unplugged the cord. You permanently stopped asking for their advice. You completely stopped seeking their approval. You entirely stopped reacting to their manipulative withdrawal of affection. It is exactly like a bloated parasite, suddenly realizing that the host has developed total, unbreakable immunity to its presence. The parasite is not just angry. It is frantically fighting for its very survival, because without the host, it has absolutely no identity. They are incredibly frantic, throwing out pathetic hoovering attempts, sending random texts, faking emergencies, offering weird backhanded compliments, or picking sudden fights just to see if they can get a pulse, just to see if the cord is still somehow attached. But you give them nothing but the flat line of your total, unbothered indifference. They look incredibly goofy, trying to assert authority over someone who has completely exited their jurisdiction. They see your fierce independence, but they cannot fathom the profound spiritual emancipation that took place inside your mind. You do not hate them. You have simply outgrown the need to factor them into your reality, and to a massive ego that wants to play God in your life. Your complete self-sufficiency is the ultimate, unforgivable blasphemy. They are melting down because you proved they were always optional. Number 13. Your unshakable, grounded peace acts as an offensive weapon against their fundamentally chaotic, drama-addicted nature. You have intentionally cultivated a stoic tranquility, an inner sanctum of emotional regulation that remains completely undisturbed by external circumstances or petty provocations. They are severely addicted to drama, thriving on a constant, exhausting feedback loop of chaos, conflict, and emotional dysregulation just to feel a fleeting sense of aliveness. The psychology of chaos addiction is profound and deeply tragic. Many deeply wounded and fiercely insecure people have nervous systems that are quite literally wired for war. Peace, to them, feels like a terrifying, suffocating void. It feels highly dangerous because in the complete silence of true peace, they are violently forced to confront their internal trauma, guilt, and profound emptiness. Therefore, they must constantly stir the pot, create conflict, and instigate drama to actively avoid looking inward. When they interact with you, they subconsciously expect you to meet them at their frantic level of dysregulation. They throw a grenade of heavy drama into your life and eagerly wait for the explosion. But your unbothered peace acts as an elite bomb squad. You diffuse their chaos with a single, calm breath. This absolute lack of reaction does not just annoy them. It deeply, fundamentally dysregulates them. It is exactly like a massive, violent hurricane violently crashing into the base of a silent, immovable mountain. The hurricane spins faster, screams louder, and violently throws debris everywhere, absolutely furious that the massive mountain refuses to bow, refuses to bend, and refuses to participate in the storm. Your peace is terrifying to them because it highlights exactly how incredibly out of control they actually are. Every time they lose their temper and you remain calm, they are forced to see themselves as the chaotic mess they truly are. Your fierce emotional regulation is a high-definition mirror reflecting their profound emotional immaturity. They are frantically trying to figure out how to crack your shell, how to find the exact button that will make you scream, cry, or fight back. Because as long as you remain in a state of grace, they look like absolute fools throwing a massive tantrum in a holy sanctuary. Your peace is not just a shield. It is the most devastating psychological weapon you possess. Number 14. You have stepped fully into your divine authority, rendering their earthly, low-vibrational games completely obsolete. You have recognized, with absolute, unbreakable clarity, that your life is not a petty competition with mere mortals, but a massive, sacred assignment given directly by the divine. You are playing for the audience of the Creator, heavily executing a massive vision that spans generations and higher spiritual dimensions. They are still playing an incredibly petty, earthly game of fragile ego, status, popularity, and material comparison. The psychology here completely reveals a profound, crippling spiritual inferiority complex. They look at you and they realize, on a visceral, unspoken level, that you are not playing by the same rules anymore. You absolutely do not care who has the bigger house, who has the most followers, or who gets invited to the exclusive, fake parties. You have completely transcended the shallow matrix of comparison. When they desperately try to engage you in these petty rivalries, they quickly realize they are entirely outmatched. It is the ultimate metaphor of a child aggressively trying to play a silly game of checkers on a board where you have already completely mastered multidimensional chess. They are sliding their little plastic pieces forward, sweating and trying to capture your pawn, while you are orchestrating massive movements that dictate the entire architecture of the universe's board. They cannot compete with you because you are no longer in their league, and they absolutely know it. They fiercely feel the massive shift in your aura. They feel the heavy weight of your presence when you walk into a room. You do not have to say a single word. Your energy loudly announces that a king or a queen has finally arrived, not by human appointment, but by undeniable divine decree. They are freaking out because all their earthly tactics, the money, the gossip, the social leverage, are completely, utterly useless against true spiritual authority. They are watching you beautifully build a lasting legacy while they are still fighting over scraps in the dirt. They see the authority, but they absolutely do not understand the heavy anointing. They are utterly terrified because they finally realize that they are not fighting you. They are fighting the spirit that firmly resides within you. And that is a massive battle they have already catastrophically lost. When you zoom out and deeply look at the totality of this entire dynamic, one absolute undeniable truth becomes completely impossible to ignore. None of this frantic behavior was ever truly about your physical actions, your words, your human mistakes, or your material possessions. The real target, the absolute bullseye of their fierce jealousy and their frantic, obsessive behavior, has always been your raw energy, your divine alignment, and your unbreakable light. They are currently melting down not because of what you did to them, but because of the incredible force you have become. In spite of them, they placed a literal timeline on your destruction, eagerly expecting to celebrate your massive failure before the year was out. But you completely shattered their clock and confidently stepped into eternity. You survived the unsurvivable, and now your mere unbothered existence is violently exposing the fragile, highly performative reality they built. You absolutely do not need to prove anything to these people. You do not need to desperately perform for their limited understanding. You do not need to politely explain your massive blessings, and you certainly do not need to seek revenge. Your profound healing is your absolute ultimate vindication. Your continued, incredibly unbothered existence is the most devastating retaliation possible. Let them be thoroughly exhausted by their heavy masks. Let them aggressively choke on their own toxic projections. Let them throw frantic, goofy tantrums in the empty theaters of their own making. Your only job now is to rigorously protect your peace, continuously build your massive spiritual architecture, and forcefully remain radically, unapologetically authentic. Keep walking in the heavy authority of your calling, knowing with absolute certainty that the frantic noise behind you is simply the sound of an illusion violently collapsing under the crushing weight of your truth. Make sure to subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, drop a comment with what point hit you hardest, and share this video with someone who needs the reminder. Stay chosen, stay blessed.